Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm, and I'll be your host. So today I'm joined with Scott Jelinek. How are you doing today, Scott?
I am fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Good. Well, thanks for coming on the show. It's been a while since we kind of interviewed somebody about this topic, but thought it was timely. So, Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
So I'm going to give you the short version, so we don't have to stay till midnight. But I'm originally from Long Island. I dropped out of school when I was 17 in 11th grade, moved to Virginia Beach, and I was a landscaper, and I bought my first house. I always tell people, only the older people even remember non-qualifying assumptions, right? They did away with them in 87 and 89. And no interest in real estate, and then I became obsessed with buying houses. And you're going back all the way since 1994 was my first one, and I've been buying ever since. Although, as you know, if you've been in this for a while, we've had a roller coaster of a time, ups and downs, and I've lost it all and started over, which is why I have a unique model now, because I've wanted to lay a solid foundation so I never have to go through that again.
Nice. So what is it you kind of focus on with real estate? You've got kind of this specific thing you do. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I do slow flips, and I've done it all. I've rehabbed hundreds of houses. I've done regular rentals. I've done every facet you can think of in real estate. But after the bust, I got crushed. I had 84 houses going into the bust, and I lost 55 of them to foreclosure. And ever since then, I realized that everything that was being taught was wrong. Basically, everybody's teaching you all these leverage models, and making money, borrowing and making your little spreads, and all of that was great until it wasn't, right? Until the bust happened and 50% of your people weren't paying and values got cut down. And so I kind of flipped what I used to do to what I do now, which is what we coined the slow flip, which is why we buy lower end properties, but we borrow private money and pay them off in 5 years, but we sell them immediately on 30-year mortgages. So we buy them wholesale, we sell them retail, we buy on 5-year notes, and we sell them on 30-year notes. And so it's all a cash flow play, where we're not in love with the house so much as we're just in love with the paper.
So talk to me about that. So you're buying properties. Are you rehabbing them, or you're just kind of buying and holding?
We do zero rehab. I don't even, people are sometimes shocked when I show them what I do. We don't even clean them up. We don't mow the lawn. To be honest with you, I have the last 35, 36 I bought, I've never even seen, because we've started buying now out of state. And so I've sent somebody by to do pictures and video, and then we market them exactly as they are. So I haven't even seen the houses. So no, we do no rehab. We don't even do cleanup. We don't even mow lawns. We sell them. The way I always jokingly tell people is we sell the financing, the house comes with it.
So you're buying a property. I would imagine it would have to be a pretty deep discount to market, right?
Correct.
And then you're renting it out and using short-term notes, which aren't cheap, right? You're doing probably hard money. I would imagine 10 to 15%, somewhere in that range. And then you're holding them for a few years. You're paying them off or paying them down, and then you sell them to somebody and you provide paper.
So our typical, I'll give you real numbers. Our typical slow flip buy might be $30,000, right?
Okay.
Which I know a lot of people all over the country will be like, you can't buy a house for $30,000, depending on where you are. I always tell people, I said, just get on the internet. There's plenty available in that price range. Well, then we'll borrow full 30,000 with private money at 12% interest on a 5-year amortized mortgage. So our payment comes out to $667.33, and we have an amortized mortgage. There's no balloon. 60 payments, and it's free and clear. We immediately sell them, typically anywhere from $69,000 to $89,000 with a 30-year mortgage, and they typically are collecting $875 a month, which is the same as what market rents would be in the area. So we don't really make anything for the first 60 months, but then after that, we own them free and clear, and then we get paid for the additional 25 years. It's pure profit.
So you're renting them out long term.
We're not renting them. We sell them with owner financing.
Oh, okay, got it. All right. Well, that makes sense. So yeah, so I guess the key so what's the key to this to make this work?
There's a couple keys. One, obviously locating the deals is a key, but the biggest key is having the private lenders or your own money available to do it. And the reason is there's a hole in the marketplace, and that is with these lower end properties, the sellers need the cash to sell. They can't sell with the owner financing. They need the cash. Yet the buyers for these properties don't have any cash. They need the financing. And so we get in the middle. And so the real key is to have access to the capital, either your own or to line up private lenders.
So one thing that kind of comes to mind is, if you're working with investment properties is one thing, but if you're working with, you know, uh, individually owned properties, there are a lot of rules and laws in place and regulations for that as opposed to investor financing.
Correct.
So how do
Yep.
you deal with that aspect? Because to me, that's there. Every investor I know stays way clear of that.
So that comes up a lot, and that's a great question. Since Dodd-Frank, we're limited now. You can do 3 per year per entity to homeowners. We can do an unlimited amount to investors, and a good chunk of our customers are investors who do the conventional model. They buy and fix it up and then rent it out. So a good chunk of our buyers are landlords, but we're allowed to do homeowners. We're allowed to do 3 per year per entity, or if you want to do more than that, you have to put them through underwriting. So you're allowed to still do full own, as many as you want, but you have to, after you pass 3 in an entity, it has to go through underwriting.
Right, but I mean, if you're buying $30,000 properties, you're doing a lot more than three. So how do you deal with that?
Per entity. So you're allowed to have as many, this is why the law was written. So every lawyer I've had research it and give me their opinion letter. It's so gray because you're allowed to do per entity, which means you could have 100 entities with 3 properties in each and never have to go underwriting, or you can just have a loan officer do the underwriting and then have as many as you want in there, unless of course you're selling to an investor, in which case there's no regulation.
Okay, interesting. So what are some of the hurdles in place for you to scale this?
So we have been scaling. So I have a lot of people in my group. I have 172 people in my group who are buying in the same states that we buy in. I personally own 170 properties. I believe by the end of this year, I'll get to 200. And I don't know that I'm going to scale beyond that. And it's an interesting question because a lot of times people are always asking, well, how big can you get? How big do you want to get? And I'm a big person on freedom over money, right? And so I have already more than I even need. It got to a point where I do it as because I'm like, well, why not? It's available to me. But I don't know that I have ambitions to really scale beyond that. I've more or less been helping and coaching other people toward building it up themselves. I don't need, I think when I get to 200, I'll probably even stop myself unless, just an opportunity falls in my lap, but I'll probably stop actively buying more.
So, but hypothetically, if you wanted to, like I would imagine if you got 200 properties, that in itself is a logistical challenge. There's systems, processes that need to be in place to manage all that. I mean, can you get into some of that? Because I can identify some, but I'd rather hear it from you.
So, because of the way we operate, we're not landlords. So, we don't actually do property management. We are strictly managing. We receive a check every month and we mail in a payment if we still have a note on it. But that's the end of our management. We don't answer calls. We don't do repairs. We don't have leaky toilets. We don't deal with any of that stuff. Now, if somebody defaulted, then we would have to go through that process. But as far as management, we don't have the regular landlord management. Years ago, when I had before the bus, I did regular rentals, and I only got to 84 properties with regular rentals, and that is a logistical nightmare managing properties on your own. And I advise people now that I said, just use a management company unless you own a management company. But for slow flips, it's just managing a note. So we don't actually have the work involved that goes into regular property management.
So let me ask you this. If you're buying these properties for a big discount, typically that happens because there's some hair on the deal. There's some problem, right? Whatever it may be. You don't typically find a discount unless there's something that needs to be done. So how do you get around not doing rehab?
So it's not, there's two reasons for a discount, as I'm sure you know. That's either a distressed property or a distressed seller. So a lot of times it's the seller that's distressed and not the property, meaning they need the money right now. They can't wait to put it on the market. So we buy a lot from divorce, foreclosure, bankruptcies, stuff where they need to sell now, but it's not because the house is in bad shape. And the second thing is houses are in bad shape sometimes, but it doesn't mean it needs to be renovated, but it doesn't mean we need to renovate it. Oftentimes we sell to guys who are like, we sell to a lot of Section 8 landlords. And so they'll buy them, they'll pay us $800 a month, $875 a month. They'll fix them up, but then they're getting $1375 from Section 8. So they're making the spread, but they did the work and they do the management. And all we're doing is operating like a bank. We just collect a check every month.
Okay, interesting. So you're talking about properties that are 30,000. I live in the Northeast. That doesn't exist. So what parts of the country do you look at? You're able to find properties for $30,000.
So there's an abundance of them, which is really interesting because I'm originally from Long Island, and a lot of my friends are there, and they're like, we can't buy a parking space for 30 grand. You know, even anything would be 300 grand, right? And when I started buying them, even in where I live in Virginia Beach, right, in Hampton Roads area, the seven cities where I live in, you couldn't pre-bust, you couldn't buy anything under $100,000, right? Then after the bust, there were houses coming on the market for 30 grand, 16 grand, 40 grand. And so we started doing this model here. But as you know, over these last several years, the market has been going up and up and up. So we kind of priced ourselves out to where we couldn't continue on. So then we started looking elsewhere. And there is an abundance of states where there's no shortage of them. And I'll tell you, two of the big ones we buy in, well, three of them is we buy in St. Louis, Missouri area, we buy in Illinois, and we buy in Indiana. And there's no shortage of them. You can literally just go right on Zillow and type in sub 50,000, and you will be shocked with how many houses you find in the price range. And you look at them, and you're like, you can't even build this. How does that exist for that price? But there's no shortage of them. I mean, they're out there. There's also in Alabama, but we don't buy in Alabama. There's a lot down there in the price range. We don't, because they have different laws as far as the owner financing there. But
So
there's no
you're
shortage of these deals.
so you're also looking at states where the owner financing is actually probably more favorable than others.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. So, so it's interesting because, as you said, Northeast, it's like 10x whatever this is. I don't think I could find a $300,000 house, nonetheless a
Nope.
$30,000 house. As you said, a parking space. Parking spaces around here are like 50 to 100,000. Some are
Yep.
up to 500,000, depending on where it is. But now, so mostly you're looking in those kind of states. So are you able to, as you're looking in these states, are you able to find enough deals? Like, how hard is it to find these deals?
It's not very hard. I am a little bit more selective. I have some people in my group that they buy everything they can come across, and I'm selective where I have enough, so I don't want any headaches. So I'm pretty picky with what I'll buy. I have five that was sent to me this morning from a property manager out there that I'm looking at, and they look good, and I'll probably buy them, but I'm going to be getting them for about $23,000 each, which I know sounds sick if you're in an area where you're like $22,000, you can't buy a house for that. Then they're already rented at 870, 850, 875 each. And like sometimes the math just doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, why are these houses available? Why would a $20,000 house exist that collects $900 a month? It doesn't make any math sense. But yet they're abundant out there. They're readily available. But I'm a little pickier because I have a lot, and I'm not just trying to get started, and I don't want any headaches. But I have a lot of other guys. They'll just buy, they buy everything. They buy what there's no shortage of them. The shortage is lining up your private money or using your own money, because you have to be able to pay cash for them, but there is no shortage in the available deals out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm looking at a map of the U.S. right now, and just kind of looking at kind of metrics for valuations. Now, of course, you're doing things the old-fashioned way, which is going around and trying to find deals, which takes work, right? It's not
Right.
easy, but it's profitable if you can find it. And I'm looking at the map of the country, and pretty much east of Colorado, those states, that kind of line there, and then the on the East Coast, it gets a little expensive, but pretty much if you're looking at Pennsylvania, middle part of Pennsylvania, west, so that kind of like the heartland, the flyover states, like you can find good deals there. It looks like the valuations are reasonable, but most of the country highly overvalued in so many areas.
Yeah, there
So
even like New York has them in upstate New York. You can buy houses for 30 grand there, but we don't buy them again because they're not landlord friendly there. It could take you a
yeah.
year if you had to turn them over. Pennsylvania, same thing. There's a lot of areas that are really great, but I don't buy there because they don't treat landlords very well. So it's amazing to me how many states have houses that are in these price ranges. But again, we try and be selective as to where we buy to make sure it's favorable for us as well as for our buyer.
Yeah, and I think that's an important context too that we haven't talked about, which is landlord friendly states. So like Massachusetts, if I'm a landlord, it's not landlord friendly. And
Right.
if I was a landlord in Massachusetts and somebody stopped paying, at the earliest, it would probably take me 9 months to get them out. they would
Yeah.
not pay for 9 months, probably destroy the house, get all mad and rip stuff out and just make a mess of it for 9 months. And eventually, if I really am good at this, I could evict them in 9 months. If not, it could take 18 months. And all that time, they're destroying the house with no payment.
Yep. New
And then
York,
I got
same
Rhode
way.
Island.
California. Yep.
Yeah, and then I got Rhode Island, right across the border, where you go there and it's like 30 days, a constable kicks them out with all their stuff. Like
Yep.
I don't care I don't care if it's the middle of winter, you're getting kicked out to the curb. Right. So there's different states have different rules and what's kind of allowable. So what are some of the more favorable states in your mind that are landlord friendly?
So Virginia, where I live, is very landlord friendly. It takes us about 6 weeks. If somebody was to default, it takes us about 6 weeks. Now, I didn't tell you this. We have a very, very low default rate because of the fact that they're putting a down payment and they are homeowners. They're treated like a homeowner. They're paying it off. So our default rate is really low. Even during COVID, our default rate was really low. But St. Louis has been really good to us. All of Missouri has been good. Indiana is really good with landlords. Illinois is good. We have great deals in Illinois, but they require 60 days, where most other states, once they're late, you can file and it's done in 30 days. In Illinois, it's 60 days, and you have to record them out there. They have a few extra hoops, but the deals are really good, so we still buy there. But those are my favorite states right now.
Okay. Any others you can think of that are also landlord friendly?
So we have a lot of people who buy in Alabama, and the numbers work really well in Alabama. The big difference out there is Alabama requires a foreclosure. If instead of just an eviction, they would require a foreclosure if someone defaulted. And although that's not a deal killer because they're pretty quick there, they get that done in 4 to 6 weeks. It's just another expense. Rather than spending $38, you might have to spend a couple grand with an attorney to go through that process to do a foreclosure.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. So, all right. So now you teach other people to do this too. Is that part of what you do? Is you kind of coach people on how to do this?
Correct. So I used to do live local events for years. I started in 2015, and then recently I stopped and brought it to be an online platform. And we have people all over the country now who are doing it, and it's actually helped me a lot too. It's interesting because when you coach, you're helping them, but I actually learn a lot now too because I have people in different states, and so I'm researching deals with them and for them in all different states, and I'm learning new markets and new rules and all over the country now. So that's been pretty good as well.
Nice. So what do you like most about coaching?
Change, it's interesting because I didn't know this going into the business, going into coaching. I always helped people because I enjoyed it. But one of the things I really like with the slow flip model, but this is different. I used to coach on wholesaling and everything else that we do. I still wholesale myself. But with the slow flip model, it's predicated on setting yourself free. That's our whole business model, is to have your freedom number, which it might be 10 grand a month, 20 grand a month, 5 grand a month, whatever it is. And then we build how many slow flips you need towards setting yourself free. And we can set anyone free in 5 years. Well, I've been doing this for so long now that my people are hitting that. Like my guy who has the most, he has 75 now. His 5 years starts this December, where they start coming free and clear. And so that's the part I think I'm most excited about. When I work with them over a long time is when they hit that 60th month, and now the money starts to be theirs every month. And that's really enjoyable when you see the change that you've done in someone's life.
Yeah, no, I agree. So let me ask you this. So, you mentioned kind of like 5 years and things like that. So I guess the question comes, because we haven't brought on a lot of people who are real estate, coaches or programs in like the last year because, real estate's kind of been a mess, and we can get into that in a minute. But one of the questions always comes up to me is everybody makes it sound good, makes it sound easy. Oh, you can be independently
Yep.
wealthy in 60 days or less, and you can be a rock star and do all this stuff. But when the rubber hits the road, almost nobody does that because it's really not a practical expectation that somebody could do
Right.
that. So what's a realistic way that people can look at if they want to get into, slow flips or similar wholesaling? Like, what's a reasonable expectation you could say, hey, if you want to get into this is what you should expect?
So, and that's great that you brought that up. And that's one of the things I hate about the industry, about the training, coaching, seminars, is it's all predicated on being quick, right? And that's why we call it the slow flip. Ours is the opposite. And I had lunch with a guy the other day who was 21, and everything I said turned him off because when you're 21 and I'm talking, it's going to take 5 years till you make money. That's a quarter of his life he's lived already. And so for him, it was like, no, this other guy says I can make money in 3 weeks. And my plan is It's going to take 5 years. It's going to start in 5 years. It's going to take longer than that because 5 years is from the one you buy today. The one you buy in a year from now, it's going to be 6 years from now, right? So it's a long-term process. I started doing the slow flip model in 2011. And for my first 5 years, I second guessed myself a lot because I was like, I had all these properties, I'm not making any money. And it wasn't until 2016 where all of a sudden I felt like the smartest guy in the world because now I started having them free and clear. And now I have 78 free and clear out of my 170. But every month or two, I have another one coming, another one coming, another one coming. Well, all of that was because of time. And that's the hard thing for people to understand is that the real money in real estate, or basically in any investing, if you listen to all your other shows, is time, is investing and letting time run its course and not trying to have it done in a week or a month or a year. It takes time,
Yeah.
but it's
No,
better
that's,
than the alternative, right? The alternative is you wait 40 years and you get a retirement check. So 5 years seems like a long time, but it's still a lot shorter than the alternative.
yeah, no, I appreciate that context. That's really important. So let me ask you this. So if somebody wanted to scale, because I know this is always an issue, and we talked about this, a little bit ago, but one of the things I've found is with any of these programs, whatever the approach is, there's always issues when it comes to scale, right? And it might not be being a property manager, but there's always something, right? Maybe it's logistics, but you know, how would you advise people to kind of like handle that if they're, because people come from different professions. If you're an engineer, you might be looking at these
Yeah,
numbers and be like, oh, this is easy. I can just like put
right.
these systems together. But if somebody's like an artist, they might not have that kind of skill set, right? So how can people manage a volume of what you're talking about? It might be easier, but you still got logistical challenges. So how do people handle that? Like systems, or what do you recommend that people do?
So there's software. We use some automated softwares. One's called My Deal Factory. We use Propertyware to manage our properties. It's we don't I have no employees. I used to have a lot of employees. I used to have a large company up until 2013. I got rid of everybody and it went back to just being me. So I'm not a scale guy. So a lot of times people talk about, oh, if your business isn't making you money while you're on vacation, you don't have a business, you have a job, right? That's what they all love to tell you. And I always say, you're right. I have a job. I have a very well paid, work very little job, but it's a job, yes. And I'm not a guy who's into scale where I just want to grow this big company. I'm into freedom, and that's what I do. I don't work very much. I make really good money, and it took me years to develop that. But I'm not trying to grow a huge conglomerate. It's never been in my wheelhouse at all. So I'm not a scale guy. But it's easy with technology we have now. We have automated softwares that collect every month. They collect the payments. Some people mail them in, but most of them we use a software that they can pay cash, they can pay whether check draft, a credit card, or debit card, and it goes automatically into our bank account and it puts it automatically in the software so you know who paid. So most of it is automated for you, but you still got to check on it, obviously. But it's not like landlording, where landlording is that can be a headache, and that's a thing a lot of people teach too. We didn't touch on that, Kirk. Everybody's out there promoting and teaching this BRRRR method. I'm sure you've heard of them: the buy, renovate, rehab, rent out and refinance and repeat. I hate that more than anything because everybody loves it, and you make this little spread, but you're drowning in debt the whole time. And they're like, oh, it's a 30-year mortgage. I'm not a fan of a 30-year mortgage. I did that before, and I got my butt beat doing it, and I'm against debt. And I know everybody loves to argue you can make more money if, and they're right, you can make more money if everything stays perfect. But I'm a very safe and secure person. So yeah, it takes me a little bit longer, but that's my 2 cents. So I'm not really into scaling. I'm into getting to your freedom number and then enjoying your life.
No, that's good. I appreciate that. I think it's people get into real estate for different reasons. Some people get into for passive income, for freedom, for making money, whatever it is. I always laugh at the fact that people are like, oh, it's passive income. Like, there's nothing passive
Yeah,
about
yeah.
real estate. Like,
Right,
unless you're investing in a stock like a REIT or something like that, there's
right.
nothing passive about any of that.
Yeah. The government treats it as passive, but you're right. It's a business.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about valuations, because I think one of the challenges, we've had a really good run for the last 40 some odd years, 42 years, where real estate has done nothing but gone up, and now we're getting to a period where dynamics are changing. So what would you tell people, like in a market like this where things are really overvalued? Because the reason we have been bringing on a lot of these real estate people on the show is that everybody's like, oh, you got to do this. It's like, yeah, but what if everything's really expensive and real estate prices drop like 40%? Then what do you do? You know, and they're like, oh, that'll never happen. Like, yeah, well, real estate never goes down either until 2008, and then it went down.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of address that when we deal with kind of valuations?
So first off, in my opinion of the market, I remember going into the end of 2022, I would have bet money we were going to be crashing in 23. I still do believe it. I mean, I feel like every day I'm like, when is it coming? Because the houses are still selling instantly. The prices are still going up, and it seems crazy to me. But when is it going to happen? I feel like, and I don't know if you agree or not, Kirk. I feel like it's inevitable. It's going to happen. I can't fathom that we keep going the way we're going. But for our properties, they really can't go down. I mean, we're buying them so cheap that there's no room to really go down other than free. Because we buy houses, I mean, 15 grand, 25 grand, 22 grand. There's nowhere really to go. When you're looking at $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 houses, there's plenty of room to go down. I remember after the bust, I had a house that I sold for $199. I renovated back then. I sold it at $199. I bought that same house again after the bust for $30,000. I still own it to this day. The same house I renovated, I sold it. The person I sold it to got foreclosed on, and I bought it again. That's a drastic, but when you buy them at 30, I mean, like, where can it go? That's kind of how I feel with the slow flips anyway. It can't go down, but so much.
Yeah, well, I think it's certainly your risk is a lot less for sure.
Right.
But if you own one property at 30,000 versus 10 properties at 30,000 versus one at 300,000, the risk is the same, right? It's just, you just got it spread out over a different number of properties. I think the question is, so what do you think of evaluations?
Where they are now or where they're heading? So right
Well,
now, I
both.
feel like we are. It's insane to me. And much like the stock market, I feel like it's no longer the way it used to be, where it was based on the business and based on their income and their valuations. And now I feel like they're just coming up with pricing, and I don't feel like it's all related anymore. The interest rates went up, so everybody expects it to come down, and yet the prices are still going up. And I think it's way overvalued, but they combat that by telling you, yeah, but there's no supply, which is why we're still going up. I'm like, all right, well, at some point, it cannot continue on, in my opinion anyway. I feel like it can't continue on with the pricing the way it's going, but only time will tell. And I always tell everybody has a prediction, and everybody says what they believe is going to happen. And my answer is always, if anybody actually knew, they'd be a bazillionaire. We're all guessing. And everybody, you see the talking heads on TV, everybody's guessing. Nobody knows. They have their reasons and their theories that they believe in, but in the end, we all find out a day after it happened.
Yep.
That's when we're going to find out.
100%. We talk about that a lot in the show. Predictions are useless, but
Yep.
so, all right, let's talk about this a little bit, because I think we're on the same page here with this. But I think the question. So here's the question that comes up a lot: is I'm looking at affordability, right? If you can't afford it, you're not buying it, right? That's a hard line in the sand. If you can't afford it, you're not buying it, right? So everyone fits in this equilibrium wherever it is, some high, some low, but wherever it is, we have this equilibrium of wages, of what we can afford. And then, it becomes less affordable. It's not like all of a sudden one group is like, well, I can't afford 2 million. Now I'm going to afford like 500,000. Like, well, where are the 500,000 people going? Like, well, they're going to go down to 300. So everything shifts down, but then where are the people at the end going? Like, so the equilibrium doesn't make sense to me if you're talking about supply and demand, but everyone keeps saying, well, it's all supply and demand. We don't have enough supply. I'm like, and my thing is like, are there rows of people driving around in RVs because they can't find a house? There are no houses in the US. Well, no, that's not the case. So is supply and demand really an issue? So I'm curious to your thoughts on this, because I hear this all the time, and I feel like, who's missing the boat here?
So it's interesting. Like, I've had this conversation about everybody. If there's a hard times or prices got too high, the guy in the 500,000 can go to a 400. The guy in a 4 can go to a 200, right? But that's why I love our houses. I'm like, everyone can go down to ours, but there's nowhere to go after us. That's it, other than a tent. There's nowhere to go after us. The only thing I could think of with what you're saying with the supply and demand, and I don't know how it is in your market, but I know in my market, they are building apartment complexes like everywhere. And I can only assume that that's taking some of the people, out of the equation. But I really don't know, because you're right. There's not tent cities, at least not in my area. We don't have tent cities and a bunch of people in vans. So I think the basis they give me with the supply and demand is just the amount of houses that they have in the system, in the MLS, the amount of houses available based on the amount of houses that used to be available.
So, all right. So I guess let me ask you this. I mean, you're dealing with the bottom end of the market for house prices. What other problems kind of come in there? I'd imagine that, it's kind of like if you're a landlord, you can have the high end properties, which you probably have very few issues. But you're also getting a very low yield. But then the low end
Right,
properties, you get all sorts of issues. I got friends who are landlords and they're bringing guns with them because they're afraid of, some dogs,
right.
killer dogs in their property for the tenants. You got stuff like that, and it's like you're a slumlord, but the yields are really good. So, what are some of the issues, with any sort of trade-off? If it was easy, everyone would do it. So,
Right.
what are the trade-offs for going into the low end of the market?
So the low end of the market, the houses we buy, I call it real estate purgatory because of exactly what you just said. Landlords, typical landlords, don't want these houses because they're low end. They're the biggest pain in the ass. They might be a higher yield, but you're going to deal with all the headaches. You're going to deal with your fear, like you said, you're bringing a gun. Rehabbers don't want them because they cost more to rehab than they're going to be worth once they're done. So rehabbers don't buy them. So they're stuck selling to us, and we buy them because we're not landlords. So we sell them to the same people that would have been tenants, but now they can be owners. And so we don't deal with the maintenance. We don't deal with the turnovers. We don't deal with any of that stuff. We just do the financing. A lot of times I tell people, I said, I'm not really in real estate. I'm in finance because that's what we do. Is we just do the financing. We're not actually, I don't even see the properties, so I'm not actually into the house.
So there was a concept I read about 20 years ago called like the buy lease back, which I think worked at a certain time, but it didn't work for like 20 years because it was just the numbers didn't make sense. You couldn't find the deals. Are you effectively doing that? You're doing like buy lease backs. You buy it and then you lease it back to the people where they're technically owners, but it's still kind of a lease, but it's like a lease option. I think is what it was called, a lease option.
Yeah, we don't do lease options. I used to do lease options until I had a court case once, and a judge explained to me that his words were, the benefits and burdens must convey together. He said, the way we had it written is we had all the benefits and they had the burdens. And he's like, no, it doesn't matter what your contract says. The law says you're still a landlord and you still have to do these repairs, regardless of your contract says they're responsible for everything. He said, no, the law says you're responsible. And that's when I went to an attorney and I said, listen, this is what the judge said. What do we need to do? And so we revamped everything to actual owner financing. So technically, it's like we still own it, but they have all the benefits and burdens of ownership. They get the tax deductions, they get to do the repairs, they get the appreciation. I've had people sell houses and walk away with 50 and 80 grand. And my buyer walk away with money because the house went up and they were able to sell it. And that's what we want. We want everybody to win in the situation. So my buyers win, we win, our lenders wins. And that's the way. That's my opinion. The only way the business could work. Because if it's only us winning, then ultimately it's going to fail. And so we used to do lease options, and we stopped that for those reasons.
Interesting. I had not heard that before. That's an interesting take on it. What Yeah, so if I think about it that way, that's there was something that came out in the wake of 2008, which was equity share, right? So people were trying to find ways to get people into properties. They were saying, "Oh, so basically this is the financial institutions we're trying to do this. Oh, well we'll loan you money, but we also want a piece of the equity." Like they would take like an equity share of the property if the property was questionable, and they're like, yeah, we'll sit on that. Like we'll take 25% equity in exchange for whatever. Have you ever considered stuff like that? It didn't go anywhere. I haven't seen any sort of movement on this, but it was an interesting idea.
Yeah, I've never even heard of that. That's an interesting idea, but no, I've never considered it because we're making good money on our spread and on the interest, but we also want them to have the benefit. If we did an equity share, I'm guessing we would still be considered part owner of some part, and then I guess I never really thought about it, but I don't know that I'd even want to be part owner because then we'd have liability again. But I guess the banks wouldn't have done it if they had any liability. So there has to be a way around that.
Well, actually, I'm not an attorney. I'm not giving legal or tax advice here. So all the listeners, go find your own attorneys. But it's my understanding that what people were doing is they were taking, they're writing in the loan, a share of equity. So it's kind of
Oh,
like
interesting.
you write in the loan, like, here's the deal, like you're borrowing $1,000 a month, payments, and on top, or let's say it's normally 1,000, you're saying, all right, I'll give you $700 a month on payments. However, I'm going to take 25% of the equity share. So if the price of the house values at X today and you sell it for Y in the future, we get 25% of that appreciation. So
Yeah, that's interesting.
it's built into the note. So you're not technically an owner. You have rights to the equity when it's sold, but not the you don't get the tax
Not
benefits
for
in the
profit,
short
right?
term. So you're not technically an owner, but it's a yeah. So I've seen people do it that way, and I'm like I said, I'm not an attorney, but every state's probably different. But I've seen people do that successfully.
I've never heard of that. I'm going to research it. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, they. I think in the wake of any crisis, really interesting ideas always come out because they have to, right?
Yep.
Like, oh, well, this isn't going to work. We're not going to sell houses for the next 10 years. Let's come up with some solution.
Yep.
So let me ask you this: you've been through crisis before. You've been through 2008. Prices peaked in 2005 and didn't bottom until 2010. That's a 5-year down cycle. We're in
Yep.
year one, right? So, um, what do you think? Where do you think the outcome is from here? I know I'm asking you to speculate, but based on the numbers you're seeing in the market and all that, like, what do you speculate is a reasonable outcome for this?
Again, I'd be making it up if I answered, but I believe we're going to get crushed. I feel like we have to get crushed. And everybody argues and says, well, this time's different because, right? Everyone loves to say, well, this time's different because people qualified, and this time's different because of this, and this time's different because of that. But in the end, I mean, even during the bust, when everybody let houses go, there was plenty of people who qualified for those houses and they still let them go because the value wasn't there and they were paying on mortgages that were upside down. I personally think we're going to get crushed. But who knows? Again, like I said, we'll find out a day after it happens. I really just don't know. I'd love to hear what your opinion is, Kirk, on what you think is going to happen.
Sure. I mean, we talk about it in the show all the time. If I use it as an example, and of course you never know for a fact, but if I use an example, if you had to if you had to kind of like throw a dart at a wall and say that's the point we're looking at, the way I would look at it is in 2021, there's an equilibrium in rates and price, right? Because that's what we're talking about for affordability is rate and price, right? The rate gives you the payments, right? And the price is the price, right? So with both of those, they have to find an equilibrium. If you don't, then people aren't buying, right? So basically what happened was you had like 2.5% 30-year mortgages at the end of 2021. And you had prices of wherever they were. Let's call it $500,000. I don't know what it is for median home price, but let's call it $500,000. And then 2022, that $500,000 went up 10%. So went up to 550, went up 10% in 2022, which makes me laugh still. And yet rates went up to 7.25, which I think right now they're 7 1/8 or something like that,
Right.
7.25, something like that. If you get to 7.5 from 2.5, that's a double. That means your interest payment, that means your monthly payments went from, let's call it $3,000 a month up to $6,000 a month. Now, most people can't afford that. So if you own a home, it doesn't affect you because it doesn't matter. Your payments are your payments. But if you're buying a new home, it's going to cost you twice as much for the same house. Now, if you're worth $100 million, you don't really care. But if you're a 9 to 5 Joe and Susie lunchbox that don't have wage flexibility, you can't afford to move. You got to stay there, which means that fewer people are going to be buying and selling. It means that people who do have to buy are going to have to downsize. But effectively, you have a disequilibrium because you got the prices that are still high, and then you got the affordability, which has gone down a lot. So until this comes into balance, the people who are buying are basically buying for cash, or they're just desperate and need to, and they're buying less house than they want. But at some point, that has to find a balance, which means that either prices have to come down or rates have to come down. One or the two, right? You can't keep having an equilibrium for long periods
Right.
of time. It can stay for short periods of time because let's say 5% of the market changes hands in any given year. So it might take a few years, but and it'll come into balance somewhere. So either rates go down or prices come down. We find that equilibrium. You may not like it, right? The prices may still be expensive, but the equilibrium of affordability is still there. And that's the thing I focus on, is affordability. It's not prices. The
Right.
price is a totally different problem. Like, I totally agree everything's overvalued, but if we come into an equilibrium, at least I can justify, okay, the payments are affordable for people. And yes, prices might still drop 40%, but at that point, affordability is going to drop too, because the rates will go down because the Fed will drop rates. So everything will come into a balance at some level. And so the way I look at it is, if you're going to buy a property, this is rule number one that I was always educated since a kid from, like, family friends that are really good with real estate. They said, if you buy 30% discount to market, you can't really get hurt. What I would amend that to is 30% below affordability, right? So if let's assume we have an equilibrium. Let's say prices right now, based on rates, prices have to drop about 40-45% to come into equilibrium, which is scary. But
Wow.
as a
Yeah,
national average, that's where it has to drop. I mean, I've run these numbers, and I'm a little off. I'm not being precise, but generally speaking, it's gonna have to drop around 40-45% right now for where rates are. And if that happens, then you look at it and say, is this reasonable for people to kind of have a balance? Well, I don't know. It depends where rates go. I mean, if rates keep going up, then you're going to have a problem. If rates decline, then you had a good deal. But if you buy a 30% discount to wherever that equilibrium is, I feel like no matter what, you'll be in good shape because of your price and because of your payments. You should be fine. That's kind of how I look at it, just from a number standpoint. But of course, real estate is more, was it last year, is more expensive than it's ever been, and people, it's less and less affordable than it's ever been. So I don't know. I'm trying to wrap my brain around how these numbers are going to work. And this is why we talk about it all the time in the show, is that I don't see a clear path past math, right? Math is math. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. A number
Right.
is a number. And, your feeling about that number is irrelevant, but the math is the math. And unless people start making a lot more money, or prices come down, or rates come down, I don't see any other way around it.
Yeah, exactly. Or just through inflation, everything else is up, so the price will be, if it stayed the same, it becomes more affordable if people are making a lot more money.
But that's a misnomer, because inflation is irrelevant because if people can't afford it, they can't afford it. So inflation may not affect wages, which is what we've seen for the last 20 years. Wages have been stagnant. They've kind of bounced around, but they've been stagnant for 20 years. So we haven't had wage inflation. And that's what you need to increase the affordability, right? If you make more, you can afford more. But we're not really getting that, right? People are getting laid off and all that. That's not signs of wage inflation. So, like I said, you've got those three factors. You got wages, you got prices, and you got rates. And rates are up, wages are stagnant, if not going down, and you have prices that are high. One of those has to move. I don't know which one, but
We're all going to find out a day after it happens.
Exactly. So that was my rant. But as you kind of wrap it up here, Scott, I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your wisdom with us. Where can people find more about you, and any kind of pieces of wisdom you want to leave us with?
Well, I wrote a book, I think I told you about, called The Art of the Slow Flip, and I think I was telling you I was going to give a free copy to anybody who wanted one. If you just go to slowflip.com, slowflip.com, and that basically goes over exactly how we buy a car like we buy a house like a car, and we sell it like a house. And so we buy them short term and we sell them long term, and it's a very unique method, all based on cash flow, not on the actual house, and it's not really on appreciation or any of that. It's just based on cash flow.
Nice. Well, yeah, I highly recommend people get the free book. I never turn down a free book. Unfortunately, I got a whole library of books, but I'll never turn down a free book. So I appreciate you kind of sharing that with us, Scott, and giving us, our listeners, that deal. But yeah, we'll probably be in touch in the future, because I'm always curious on different ends of the market of how people are faring in the real estate market. So thanks for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you for having me on. I had a good time, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Hey, Doug, did you hear? We're giving away free money. Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute, but before I do, there's a saying in the mining community, well, precious metals mining, that is. The saying is that if you want the best deals, you have to be in the room. Now you're probably thinking, what does it mean to be in the room? Well, I'll tell you. Being in the room means that you're on the short list of people who get invited to be a part of the best deals. These are the deals that most investors will never have access to. You mean like IPOs? Nope, IPOs are chump change. Those are for retail investors, small potatoes. That's nothing compared to these deals. These deals would have you salivating to get access to them. Once you know they exist, you will never look at investing the same way again. I almost don't want to even tell you that they exist because it will ruin your thinking of how the investing world really works. Now, you might be excited that these deals exist, but you only have access to the deals if you're an insider, or in the room as they call it. Now, as loyal listeners to the show, I'm going to give you a chance to be in the room. Money Tree Investing Podcast has created the Insiders Club. This is a community of our show's members who are loyal listeners of the show and want to get more out of their investing experience. Being a part of the Insiders Club gives you insider status for upcoming events and webinars, discounts, free stuff and books, and influence on the future direction of the show. This is a great opportunity to join us as we expand our content and services. Oh, and did I mention free money? Yes, in the next few weeks, I'll be giving away free money to our members of the Insiders Club as my appreciation for listening to the show. Now, there's no cost to join the Insiders Club. Just go to moneytreepodcast.com/free money today to join the community. That's www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money. I hope to see you in the room. All right, well, that was a great interview with Scott. Really appreciate him coming to the show. Now we're into the panel portion of our show, and because we're recording this in the summertime, we have an abbreviated panel. Everyone else is on vacation, so this week it's just Doug and I, just talking about Jelinek.
Yeah, that's fine. Hey, we've been here before. I think we got practice doing this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And those of you who don't listen, we're live every Friday on YouTube and on LinkedIn. And obviously that episode comes out on Wednesday. So let's just dive right in. So Doug, what were some of your thoughts on the episode?
My thoughts on the episode is, this is something we've been seeing for a long time, right? That people are trying to find those deals in real estate. And I think if you are willing to do the work, as much as we talk about real estate being incredibly expensive and no values out there, I see this all the time, even on FinTwit. It's like, well, there's deals, just move to where the deals are. There's houses all over this country that are affordable, and that you can find and still make a great and have a good deal on if you're an investor. He's obviously been through it before. He knows what he's looking for. He's built a business around it. I think my biggest takeaway is that he says he learned in 2008 with what he went through there, and it bit him it bit him hard to do it differently this time. But again, my only concern is he's still been a product, and his business model is still a product of extreme arbitrage, and it really and that spread, which we saw GE benefit from for decades, right? Being able to get cheap credit, turn around and sell credit to someone else at a profit or a premium. And I think that he's got a really good model for the business market climate, or the real estate climate we're in. I think he has a really good model for the financing climate we were in. I hope it's sustainable in the future, because I think that there are still great deals in places that are really depressed, like St. Louis, like he was talking about. But I wonder still how some of the changes that are going on right now and what are going to create some headwinds for that. It's not something I would recommend every single person involved with real estate just jumping in and trying. This is a well-oiled machine with an incredible amount of risk, and he obviously has it. And as you talked about, there's some regulations in how much financing or how you can structure that financing. He's obviously selling that to investors, which, again, don't have the same type of restrictions. A heck of a business model niche that he's fallen into. How he's structuring it, having things paid off and in a rapid period of time, I think it's very interesting to me. I just see a tremendous. You got to have a high risk tolerance to do what he's doing.
Yeah, what I find interesting is it's been what has it been, 20 some odd years, that it's probably been more actually, if you think about it, but it's been a long time where interest rates have been low, right? It's basically been most of the last 20 years, especially since 2008. And what I find interesting is that there are strategies that work when interest rates are low. And the strategy is basically buy real estate. Like, you get, I think the low is 2.5% 30-year mortgage. I mean, it's crazy, right? That you can get a 2.5% 30-year mortgage rate. So why wouldn't you buy, right? And the payments are cheap, and you could, if you can rent it out and make good rent, then it makes sense, right? And that is the benefit of real estate, right? You're able to borrow money and benefit from the appreciation, from the cash flow, from the renters paying down your mortgage, expenses, tax benefits. I mean, real estate is a great investment opportunity. And unfortunately, because of low rates, it eliminated a lot of different strategies that, or not eliminated, but reduced the effectiveness of a lot of different strategies. So most people were just buying and holding and renting them out. Or actually, towards the end, it got really crazy where people were buying houses they couldn't possibly rent out for any sort of rent that was affordable and Airbnb-ing them, and that was their way to get extra money, which I get, right? If you can make a buck, that works. The problem is if you're in a market where things are that tight and you need to do an Airbnb to actually make a profit, you shouldn't be doing it, because all it takes is a little nudge of higher interest rates and drop in real estate, and you're in deep trouble. So what we're seeing now is a lot of people are trying to Airbnb their place and people aren't renting. So you're not making any money, as opposed to having a renter there that's paying you every month. So the challenge is that different markets have different type of strategies that work well, and people had to do Airbnbs to make it work. Now, if you get a higher interest rate environment, it's different, right? If you get an environment where you have a lot of people with poor credit, it's different, right? You can use other strategies like lease to own was a strategy that I learned about 25 years ago, and I thought it was a phenomenal strategy, but it just doesn't work in every environment. Lease to own is basically where you find somebody, you find a property, right? You buy it, and then you find a renter. And if you're in the environment where it's hard to find renters, or it's hard to find renters that qualify, so one thing you can do is you can lease to own. So you lease it or rent it to the renter with an option to buy. So they might decide, hey, I really want to buy this home, but my credit's really crappy. I'm going to need another 2 or 3 years to clean it up, but I'd love to buy this home, and I don't know if it's going to be here in 2 or 3 years. Great, we'll sell it to you for a price that we agree on. That's, what we agree in 2 years from now. You pay us an upfront option for the option to buy it, and you rent it out from us every month, right? So you get good rent, you get a great tenant because they want to own it, so they're not going to trash the property. So they're going to take care of it. If anything, they're going to put money into the property sometimes. And at the end, they have an option to buy it. If they decide not to buy it, you get to keep your option price, you get to keep the rental, you get to keep renting it out. If they do buy it, you make a good profit, you make some income along the way, and you move on, right? There are strategies like that that I love. I think it's great for the right type of property and environment, but it doesn't work for all environments, because in the last, 10 years plus, people are just buying anything. They're just buying property. They're overpaying. And I mean, around here, properties are so expensive, the developers aren't even developing because it's too expensive. They can't make any money. People aren't willing to pay for what it takes for them to make a margin. And so their profit margins are so small, they're not doing it. So the challenge is finding a strategy that works with the type of environment that we're in. And I think what we'll see with higher interest rates, a lot of other strategies are going to pop up. The one that we talked about with private mortgages, as I said in the interview, you need to do your research on the regulations in your area. Some states, some types of notes, it's a problem if you're lending to retail people who are buying a house. Banks have to go through all this. So I'm not going to sit here and explain it all because it's complex, but do your homework. Talk to an attorney, make sure you're doing it right. But private mortgages work really well if you're not working with the retail public. It's a primary residence. If you're working with investors, it's a great way to earn money and not have to deal with a lot of the shenanigans of owning real estate, taxes, renters, all that. you can get a good rate of return without all the hassle. So look at different strategies and see what makes sense for the environment. So Doug, you know, we talk a lot on Friday about real estate market, but you know, the slow flip or you know, flipping properties, that has been a really hot commodity for the last like 20 years. A lot of people have been doing fix and flips. You know, what do you think? Is that something that anybody can do, or like what's the thinking there?
Well, I mean, anybody can do it. It just depends on your capital resources and how much how patient you can be, right? You know, it's just like the markets. The markets will be irrational longer than you can be patient. I mean, can you buy properties? Yes. Anybody can go out and buy the research. Like this gentleman says, you can find properties under $30,000, pretty inexpensive. Now, in that market, that's also probably going to limit what you can sell it for too. So, you know, got to look and say, what kind of return do I need to get on it all in? And if you're going to fix and flip it, it just reminds me so much of like a couple things you just said remind me so much of like the 80s and 90s, like, private mortgages, rent to own. I mean, it's like rent a center, you know, people, but that was a big thing. Layaways coming back, by the way, Kirk. I don't know if you've heard this too. There's a lot of things I'm starting to hear that I haven't heard in 20, 30 years that when we say this, it kind of reminds us of that time. I'm starting to hear some terms that we haven't heard since that time, if that's not a little bit of a clue. But I mean, so if you're going to go in, let's say you buy a home for $30,000. Let's say you're going to fix and flip it, right? You're not necessarily what this gentleman's doing per se, because it didn't sound like he was doing a lot of fixing. It was just more of financing and refinancing, if I heard that correctly. But if you're going to fix and flip it, you buy it for 30. Well, now you better have really good connections to you either got to be really good at hands-on yourself. The first question I'd have is, are you really good at doing the work? Okay, because if you are, then there's going to be a sweat equity amount of cost and materials. But your materials, unless you have really good connections, are you getting those materials at wholesale? Are you getting those materials at retail? I took out and did a shower to try to sell my house. The shower was leaking. This was probably going back 5 years ago. And I couldn't find someone just to do a shower. Everyone wants to do the big projects. I didn't have the tools. I had to go out and buy the tools. I had to go buy the materials. I'm buying them retail. At the end of the day, fixing the shower myself was almost as expensive as paying someone else to do it, because they're able to get parts and supplies and the tools at a much deeper discount, or they already have those things so they can scale them up. So if you're going to do this yourself and go out and do this, now do you have the equipment? Are you going to can you get the pricing on your materials at a right price? That's first thing, because, you know, that renovation, that fix we're talking about could cost you $2,000. It could cost you $5,000. It could cost you $20,000. Right? I don't know. If you can't do it yourself, well, then you're gonna have to. Do you have the relationships to get people who can come in and do it at a decent discount? Because I don't know if you've looked around trying to get a house project, Kirk. Really expensive right now. It's hard to find anybody to do anything, and they are charging a premium for it. So again, do you have those can you get those partnership relationships to actually get pricing that is not going to be retail? Because that's true cost that goes into it. Then there's the cost of the time you're not selling it, right? How long you have to hold on to it before you flip it. There's a cost there. And then what's going to go on at the market at the time? What kind of value can you get in a lot of these markets right now? Now, if it is St. Louis, we've talked about this on real estate. The Midwest is, you know, their homes didn't appreciate as much. And right now they're not necessarily stalling as much as some of the other extreme markets, which happens, that reversion to the mean. So how much money can you actually get for it? But if we go into a recessionary economy for real estate, you might not be able to sell that house at a price you need to recoup enough off of that to make up for the cost of investment and the time. So that's where the patience comes in. You got to be able to know your market. You got to be able to research the market. You got to know what that market can return. You got to know what the demand is. You got to get the pricing. So long story short, Kirk, yes, anybody can do it. Anybody can do anything. Anybody can be a pilot. Anybody can, you know, maybe not a professional athlete. There are limitations, but anybody can do most things out there. The question comes down to, do you have the time? Have you done the research? Do you have the patience? Because the market will dictate your ability to keep profitability of it. And, unfortunately for most people, the actual cost and the patience aspect and what can happen with the economy, that's when all of a sudden things, and you might do, look, I got one flip, that was good. I got two flips, that was good. Everything's rolling. And then all of a sudden you have to be patient because the market turns. And that's when you see a lot of real estate investors go from feast or famine, right? Lots of money. They're making money really easily. And now it gets hard. And some people will come through that hard and do very, very well. But I also know people, Kirk, that millions of dollars in real estate when times were good and then bankrupt when it wasn't. And they've gone through that bankruptcy cycle over and over again. And some people can afford to do that. Some people go bankrupt once and they're done. They're wiped out. They're divorced. Everything goes wrong. So you've got to be capitalized. You got to be patient. And because of that, I mean, if you've got family and you've got other commitments and other distractions, and this is not a full-time job, it really has to be a business. And like any business, you've got to be able to be prepared for the rainy days. If you can't do all that, I wouldn't go near it. There's way too much risk.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I mean, if you think about the different segments of the economy, and this is kind of a general rule, not necessarily today, but a general rule of real estate investing. If you were to buy like the high-end home, right? Like around where I live in the Boston area, real estate's expensive, right? Certain parts of New York, real estate's expensive. California, right? There's really expensive homes. If you're buying like this picture perfect home on the water on a beach, in a wealthy area, you can buy it. You're probably not going to make a good income off of that property because the risk is relatively low, right? People are always going to want it. It's on the water. It's, just picturesque house. The price can go up and down in the ultra high end, but basically it's you're not going to have trouble finding somebody to rent it if you really needed to, right? But the rental price is going to be low, because if you have a $10 million home, you're not going to rent it for $1 million, a year. Like it's just not going to happen, right? So yeah, I mean, you might be able to rent it for, I don't know, 20 grand a month, something like that, hypothetically. But, you're not going to get the same numbers that you're going to get on the lower end of the market. So on the high end of the market, you've got the ultra wealthy. It's generally not something that people buy, A, because they can't afford to, and B, because the numbers just don't line up as a investment. Now, on the other extreme, on the low end of the market, which I would consider like the combat zone of the city, where it's like really sketchy area, lots of crime, people shooting each other in the streets, like really sketchy kind of area. And most cities have this kind of area somewhere. Boston, we have one. And so you look at the real estate prices there, they're real cheap, right? You can rent it out. You can make probably 20-30% returns a year on that property when the normal return might be like 4, right? As an average, and you're making like 30. Well, there's a reason you're making 30, right? You're making 30 because you got to go collect rent, because you got to bring a gun with you to keep yourself from getting robbed. Like, the people are going to take advantage of you. Like, there's a reason that you are getting a better return in those areas. And that's what we call slumlords, right? So typically people who own property in the really, really low end of the curve, property values and quality of living, is slumlords. And there's a certain type of person who'll do that. And they've got certain characteristics. They're just used to doing it. And if that's your game, that's great. You can make really good returns doing that. But there's a lot more risk, both, financially and probably personally, of having that kind of a business model. Now, there's also in between, right? If there's kind of what I would call kind of like bread and butter, everyday homes that you could go down the street and you find one just like it, right? They're average homes. Everybody can live there. There's a lot of turnover, right? So you're not sitting on the home thinking, oh my God, this home, I can't sell it. Nobody's willing to pay the price. Everybody's got the same home price. They're basically a commodity, right? And you look at these communities that build out like hundreds and hundreds of homes, they all look the same type of thing. Like everything's a commodity. Your home's no better or worse than anybody else's. And so typically there's a lot of turnover. and that helps. And so in the middle, then it comes to like, where can you find bargains, right? Can you make enough of a yield to make it make sense as an investment? Or maybe there's some value add that you can do. You can build out an extension or a porch or something, whatever it may be. Either way, if you're in there, sometimes you can actually find good deals. And if you're doing a fix and flip, for instance, you're fixing up and then flipping it, what you can do is you can find a property that maybe, like, let's just say the person was a hoarder, it's a mess, like nobody wants to touch it. You go in and you tear it out, you rebuild it, and you sell it, and you can make a good profit and move on to the next one. With bread and butter homes, as I call them, that's easy to do because there's always going to be turnover. So a fix and flip for a bread and butter home is ideal, I think, for a lot of people, because you can make it work, right? And you're not worried about selling it. You know what the numbers are going to be approximately. Of course, there's always some variation, but generally speaking, if you know what you're doing, you can always make the numbers work. So I think understanding what segment of the market you're targeting is really important, because if you're just going in saying, oh, I just want to make money, and you're like, oh, look at this property in the combat zone and look at the yields, they're great, I'm just going to go buy it. And then you realize, like, oh crap, like the people with guns are sitting out in the steps, I can't do any renovation because everyone scares me. That's a problem, right? So you need to figure out, and actually Mindy Jensen used to be on the show a lot as a panelist, and she did a lot of live-in flips. So she would buy the property, flip it while she was living there, which I can't imagine doing that. My life is crazy enough. I can't imagine having, like, sheetrock all over the house and, dogs eating electrical wires. Like, I couldn't imagine that. So, you have to find a strategy that works for you. And for her, she's done a great job. And I love the way she looks at real estate and her metrics. But I think overall, you just have to find a strategy that makes sense for you. So, Doug, as we get close to wrapping it up here, I don't know if you've ever looked at real estate or what you would consider, but, what would you give people for a good set of advice as we kind of wrap it up here, for just kind of some pointers for people looking to think about investing in real estate?
Well, I mean, I think it kind of goes, some of it goes back to Peter Lynch's model, right? Look in your area, know your area, do the research. You really have to have some pulse on it, because what's the whole saying with real estate: location, location, location. I like what you're saying about the commodity, kind of the commodity scale. To me, it made me think of Whole Foods back in the day, not now, but back when Whole Foods came, and expanded. It was like it was a rocket shot out of a cannon, right? And what was the nickname of Whole Foods at the time, Kirk? Whole paycheck. Whole paycheck.
Yeah, it
right?
still is.
Yeah, still kind of is, but there's been a changing of, there's been a little bit more commoditization out there. But I mean, their margins were unbelievable, right? So they didn't have to sell as much to make a really good profit. Now, on the other hand, there's the general grocery store model, like the Krogers of the world, where it's all about volume, right? The margins on groceries are so slim. So if you're going to go in that model, you're going to realize you're not going to be able to make one flip and make money. You're going to have to buy up a lot of real estate to make money. And eventually from that volume, you'll have the margins that will work. Now, you might be able to buy a lot more for less outflow of capital, but you're obviously going to have to deal with some of the other things. There's probably more shoplifting going on at some of those discount grocery stores. I mean, I'm just speculating here, than there might be where Whole Foods is, because of the demographics and places like that. So not only they're making a bigger profit margin, they're also not dealing with maybe as much loss there. But at the same time, not everybody's going to Whole Foods to buy. They're going to have less volume than a Kroger is. And again, it reminds me of a Donald Sterling a little bit, right? It's like the great, probably the perfect name of slumlords, the former Clippers owner, just awful reputation, owns tons of really low end properties around the Los Angeles area, but he's a billionaire, from it. So there's opportunity made in so many different areas versus like some of the Shark Tank people where they're doing more high end, like high quality, great Class A space. I think going back to the question you had, I think if you're going to get into real estate, first of all, you have to know you have to know your capacity to invest both capital and time into it. Okay, you've got to do your research. You've got to be educated. Look around your area. Know these things. If you're going to buy properties 5 states away, you better have someone that's giving you some sort of eyes on the ground information about it to keep watching the properties after you buy them, but also to be able to have the information about, beyond just numbers. Are you buying something that's going to have opportunity? Is there going to be zoning issues that you might be dealing with? Is there going to be something coming in? They might be putting a plant next to the property that all of a sudden you've got, ground wastewater or, or a factory right behind it. And all of a sudden the zoning and the property issues there, that could go. There are so many different variables, but just like investing anywhere else, do your research, know what you're getting into. But I think everybody can get into it. You talked about the live in while you renovate. I've always been a believer, for me, from residential real estate. I'm not, and again, I know people love it. I am not a fan of individual residential real estate renting. Like, to buy a house and rent this house out long term, even short term, it's different. If you're in a vacation area, that might work. But there's saturation, but if I own a house, I've got to deal with the full capital and full renovations, full maintenance, full tax base for that property. And I'm either renting it or I have full vacancy. I believe more of kind of a commercial land, real estate model where, for me, I would prefer to have something where there's multiple tenants. I can split my risk. If I have a vacancy, I've still got that covered. I've got the ability to have more capital coming in to support the different capital needs. So talk about that live-in. One thing I know people are doing, Kirk, is they're doing like a duplex. Like, they might buy a duplex or a quad. They might live in that one, but then rent out the other or the other 3, and then they've basically got their place of residence for free while they're renovating and updating things, and then eventually they can sell the whole thing and move out. That's one idea. I'm not saying that's the idea to go, but I've always been a fan of splitting your risk and kind of diversifying the number of tenants that you have per property, because I look at the data, and I know people look at short term, but residential, and they think, oh, look how much money you can make. Residential real estate, it's a fact. I've done the numbers, even in some of these great markets. Residential real estate, the actual capital appreciation return isn't as great as people generally calculate. It's been about 3 to 4% long term. But that's before you also have to start investing in the capital requirements. And I've said this before, real estate is expensive to acquire, it's expensive to hold on to, and it's expensive to get rid of, both in capital and time. So if you're going to do it, there's obviously incredible amounts of money to be made in it. Do your research, make it a full-time thing. I don't think it's a hobby. I always ask people too, do you want to be a landlord? Do you really want to deal with that? Because if you don't, then you got to get a property manager, and that also cuts into your margins. So there's just so much you have to know, other than, hey, like, I know if I buy this place, I'm going to make money off of it. If I buy it at $30,000, I know I can sell it for $40,000. There's a cost that's going to eat into that $10,000 from day one. And so it just, like anything, do your research, become an expert before you put your money into it.
Yeah, totally agree. So Doug, where can people find more about you?
We're right here. It's July. And again, do your research. I own a firm that's ProCollege Planners. If you want to go out to our website, ProCollegePlanners.com. College is expensive. The last thing you want is a $200,000 degree that unfortunately doesn't return on your investment. And, they're looking for jobs, and you've spent a lot of money, or you've sacrificed your retirement. Again, do your research, know your numbers. First thing, it's free. Go to, you said that at the end of your conversation the other day, Kirk. You know what? Free ebook, free information. Go to our website, download our free checklist, start to get the information you need around the numbers. And then if you have any questions to make sure that you're making the right decision of the right college for your child and financially affordable to you, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer any questions you have. ProCollegePlanners.com.
That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, Wealth Manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do, so invest in your life.